UFCW's had a long history here in Colorado with cannabis. We were the front runners, boots on the ground, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in helping to pass recreational as well as medical. We fought bans in Fort Collins. We fought the ban in Pueblo. Even though some of our quote-unquote so-called allies in politics did not agree when we fought the bans, okay, to lift those bans. So we've been involved in it a long time. Our international union actually has a cannabis department, okay? And so as this all took place and this legislation was moving forward, Chris and I and our political director, we were the bastard children in this meeting that we had with the governor's office, because all of big cannabis was there. Green Solution, Medicine Man, Live Well, which they led the biggest charge, and Native Roots, and all their lobbyists. So anyway, what we were moving was we were wanting to move an amendment to add on to this that you had to have a labor peace agreement, kind of what Marty had been talking about earlier, okay? And there's a lot of different things in the labor peace agreement. It's just not about a living wage, which is important. You know, there was a lot of other things, workplace safety, you know, a lot of these things in place, and that's why we're having this training today. And when I talked to Peter and Chris about this, they said by all means they would send people. And this is only the beginning, as we want to continue to do this, move around the state with Marty and stuff, and educate more cannabis workers in workplace safety and what takes place. I came out of a packing house, guys. Most dangerous job in the country at one time when I was in it, okay? I feel fortunate. I only walked out with losing the backside of one finger, and I had to have one hand surgery. So I felt fortunate, but I've seen a death in my plant. And when that death occurred, that afternoon, that evening, our plant manager quickly rushed to the facility and had instructed all the maintenance guys to start welding and making shields around that equipment. Once again, shifting it to the worker blame. This was in a union plant, guys, but to shift the blame towards the worker, he reached around that guard when that guard was never ever there. So I was a shop steward, and as I arrived that day, or that morning, maintenance guys come running up to me and said, "Come on, we have to go show you something." And they showed me what they had worked on through the night. So when I got there, they quickly, shortly thereafter, put us all in the cafeteria, and then later brought us upstairs and to a big cooler where the plant manager wanted to talk to everybody. And the story was, hey, we all know you knew Jerry a lot. A lot of you worked with him, so on and so forth, so we're going to give you the day off to go home and mourn. Wasn't true. And when I spoke up, I didn't know whether to punch my plant manager in the face before he punched me, because he just come at me that way, his body language. But what it was is because I called him out. I said, no, tell everybody the truth. You can't run because OSHA's here, because it was a death in the facility, so they shut it down to investigate it. Long story short was they were fined millions of dollars, and the wife settled out of court. We did assist with her, our union did, in getting her legal counsel, and all she said, it was an undisclosed amount she couldn't say, but she said my grandchildren will never have to work, but that don't bring my husband back. But I mean, imagine if that was a non-union facility, what could have happened, right? So it's kind of back to why we jumped in with these labor peace agreements and really being out there in front of the workplace safety, because of some of the things we've seen going on in the cannabis industry across the country. You know, as well as a living wage, those type of things. So when we went forth with this, we were hit with so much opposition. I mean, people were calling me out of the woodwork, wanting to sit down, wanting to have a private meeting with me, you know, and discuss this. Could we back off of this? Because this is huge to the industry about bringing these outside investors in. So in the meeting with Jared Pullis, we had discussed about the LPAs and how it needed to be on House Bill 1090, because if you're going to bring this outside money in, you know, a lot of times bigger is not always better, and we wanted to make sure that the workers' interest was in the forefront. not in the rears. So in doing so, as I went through all of this, I made a statement, and it was a real simple statement. And if you all can refer back to when we seen all the Walmarts starting to come into your Colorado and other states, right? What it did to the mom and pop industries and retail. They're gone, right? And as I said, as I see this fast forwarding, maybe not even, I said 10 years for sure, 5 years for sure, probably, even within the next 2 to 3 years, we're gonna see a Walmartization of the cannabis industry. And remember, I said that, guys, because it's coming.
Yeah, no.
Okay?
Talking about it, yeah.
Because here's why. Do you know who some of the biggest investors are?
Marlboro?
Huh?
Like Marlboro or?
Exactly. The tobacco companies, Monsanto, and the beer companies, right? Because
The maker of Hennessy.
there's becoming more, as it's legalizing, there's becoming more and more people that are shifting to marijuana versus alcohol and beer companies, right? So they're starting to see these large investors, okay? And we all know it's about what Marty had shared, the billions of dollars in this industry and how it's going to grow as fast as it is in the next few years. It's because of them, right? So it's so important. And in other states, our cannabis team has done an outstanding job in getting legislatures to understand these labor peace agreements, and they're making them part of the process in order to get a license. And I know your owner at Terrapin and Peter and your lobbyist are in New Jersey was last week working on, they're signing an LPA out there, a labor peace agreement, okay, in New Jersey, because it's required. And here's how that works. What they did is they created a 3 or 5 panel board, okay, in New Jersey. In order to get a license, there's a 300-point system, okay? And the higher you score towards that 300, the better chance you're going to get a license, okay? So in doing that, you get 30 points if you have a labor peace agreement. You get another 20 points if you have a union contract somewhere else already. You get another 30 points if you have some type of a workplace safety program and training in place. And last but not least, you get another 20 points for a diverse workforce, okay, showing diversity. 100 total points of the 300 possible. But what this panel has done is said, okay, if you're a union elsewhere already, we know you have all 4 of those, you automatically get that 100 points. So 1/3 of your points is based on whether you have a union contract in place or not, okay? So I know going back when New Jersey opened medical, a lot of Colorado owners rushed to New Jersey. A lot of Colorado owners came home with no license, in fact all. They actually requested a meeting with the governor because they thought it was not right that they had to have these LPAs, these labor peace agreements as part of it. The governor politely said, tough. That's the way it is in New Jersey, go home. Okay? But what it's done is set the trend for New York and Massachusetts and Minnesota. Missouri's coming up. Illinois is going to soon go recreational. All of these states are looking at some type of form of a point system that includes labor peace agreements. Because as we saw today, and as John talked, and Belinda and Katie and different ones, is OSHA's hands are tied somewhat, right? I mean, Marty and I have been at Red Rocks Community College and talking about, because they're trying to put an OSHA training program together. It's only 10 hours, which isn't nearly long enough. But anyway, in doing that, we see that nobody is stepping up to look at, to protect the workers in this industry, right? Because it's still federally illegal, guys. So it's like OSHA can only do so much. As John said, he was at Red Rocks, basically the only way that they can come into a facility is if there's a death or a worker complaint, right? So what does this all mean as far as with our involvement? Is because that's what we do, is this local union, I can honestly say we just did some outstanding negotiations with King Soopers and Safeway. And one of our biggest things in which we prepared for a year and a half back was a safer workplace. Proud to say we have probably the best, if not the best, and some of the only safety language in retail grocery stores in the country. Okay? We actually now have safety committee meetings. We have safety inspections. Before it was store manager walk up and say, here, sign this safety sheet. Person sign off on it, didn't even do a safety walk. Okay? We addressed the concerns of in some areas, in some stores, and the pharmacies were being robbed, right? Coming in the middle of the day and, at gunpoint with narcotics. We actually sat down with Safeway. We're identifying those locations to put up the bulletproof glass. So I was proud to hear when somebody said, they have glass, they're behind some type of protective glass when you're checking IDs and stuff. These are the things that a lot of times owners don't think of. And I've been in many dispensaries. You walk in and it's kind of a cool, friendly atmosphere, and they're checking your IDs out and they're wide open, but what happens if it's, somebody wanted to rob the place, or if it was, a disgruntled person, all of a sudden it escalates, right? So there's not enough worker safety protections, especially in this industry. And that's what we're here to help do, as well as what Marty talked about, the living wage. I compare from what a bud tender does to a lot of what our pharmacy techs do that we represent in King Soopers and Safeway. You have to have that knowledge of your product, right? You're dealing with that, you're dealing with the customer, talking about whether there's side effects or whatever, if there's additional questions, you refer them on to the pharmacist, right? Well, I'm proud to say our pharmacy techs, if I did this contract, they're over $20 an hour, right? They pay $7.50 a week for their health care for individual coverage. Family coverage is $23 a week, okay? They have a pension plan, not a 401k. They put $0 in that pension. The employer puts all that money in the pension, okay? So at the end of the day, I look at it this way, and this is what I like to talk to cannabis workers about, okay? The profit margin in a grocery store, if they're making 1 to 1.5% profit off their product, that's great, right, Jim? You come out of the industry, okay? Right? Minimal profit they're happy with. What's the profit in marijuana?
All of it.
So
Times 10.
you're looking at both in retail, two different types of product, huge difference in profits, but we're also seeing a huge difference in wage and benefits within this industry, compared to another. It's a totally type of different industry in some forms, but it's still retail, right? Just as the dispensaries are retail, I have a good idea what Jim used to make as a store manager compared to some of their store managers here. Huge difference. Huge difference. But as we look at those things and we talk to cannabis owners around the country and those that we've organized, as I talked about earlier, is this huge retention problem, right? And we've sat down with them and actually explained, and if you want longevity, then you have to create things to keep people, or they are going to go elsewhere, right? So, and it's kind of like they're all stealing from each other, right? Or somebody gets disgruntled and they go to the next place and the next place and the next place. I've talked to cannabis workers that's worked at 4 different dispensaries in a year. So how do we do better with that? Well, it's just like I say, in a lot of those contracts, we build in those things, You come in, you know what your wage increases are going to be. You're going to have a safer workplace. That your insurance is going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper the longer you're there, until the employer pays 100%. All these different things, or there's a clear path to start in and come in as a bud tender, and a clear path to become a store manager someday, or to go to the grow side and work your way up to be that master grower, whatever. And it benefits the employers more because, let's face it, they're chasing where it's going to be legalized. They're looking for that expansion, or they're looking to sell in Colorado and go elsewhere. What we're also seeing a lot in the industry is we're seeing some of these investors or smaller investors gobble up a bunch of small ones, and then they're selling to these large investors. Just like as you see people that buy a house and remodel it and flip it, it's the same thing that's going on in the industry right now. You got a group of 4 or 5 guys putting their money together, they're buying up 5 or 6 dispensaries and 3 or 4 grows. The next thing you know, here comes mega monster, and they sell to them for millions and millions of dollars, and they leave and they go to the next state where it's legalized. They're taking that money, they're investing it, and they're doing the same thing. The biggest mistake that Colorado made with all of this was they just opened it up for unlimited licenses and said the free market will take care of itself and the capitalism will take care of itself. Well, what we saw it did, it drove the price of the weed down, right? And it didn't, you know. So a lot of other states have learned from Colorado's mistakes, even though if you talk to people in the industry and some of these owners, they think that, you know, everybody looks at Colorado as going what they did, but they're not. You know, they're limiting the number of licenses, and there's a reason for that. And they're really being selective in who's getting those licenses. You know, they're doing an outstanding job of weeding out the bad players, so to speak. We'll play on words there, but that's what they're doing. And looking at those that are paying that living wage, you know, and the better benefits and stuff like that, is because the last thing that they also want, that they've seen here in Colorado, is so many of the people in the cannabis industry, especially bud tender, is relying on state subsidy to make it, right? Whether it's housing assistance, whether, you know, whatever it is, you know, food stamps, WIC, whatever the programs are that they need to survive. And it's bleeding that market. And as Marty said, you know, a lot of the owners are doing some wonderful things, planting trees and giving to battered women, but are they giving back into that? No, they're not. You know, where if they just raised the starting rate of pay and provided those better benefits, okay, maybe they're going to make a little less money, as Marty showed on that one particular slide. The CEO might have to, you know, do with maybe $100,000 less or whatever the case is to bring his employees above that poverty level and provide that living wage. I know Marty and I have talked a lot too. I just kind of want to end here, but you know, there's a whole misperception about the union out there, and we are the union that's representing cannabis workers, is we're just about members and dues. It's not true at all, guys. Okay? Nobody in this room paid any dues to come here today other than your entry or your employer, whatever, paid for the class, but our members paid for this, making this possible. All right? This is what it's about. It's not about the dues, it's about bringing the whole industry up and bringing other retail industry up to where workers all rise up together, to where we can see the better things and work together, grassroots, whatever, to move legislation to make things better. I never saw so much opposition as I did this last session when I spent a lot of time down at the Capitol. I'm ashamed in our governor. I'm ashamed in a lot of our politicians that we actually endorsed, thinking they were going to move a lot of pro-worker legislation. It was pathetic. It's whatever big cannabis wanted is the stuff they were passing. And I mean big cannabis. It's not terrapin, you know, it's not trees. It's those big three. And as we are moving our legislation, we were all told by the same ones that we endorsed was, well, if big cannabis is okay with it, then we're okay with it. Okay, but who elected you? Right? Who's really interested? You ran on a slate that you were all about, you were pro-labor and you were all about workers and workers' rights. Okay? I mean, non-cannabis issues we tried to move, like paid family leave recently, this last session, that the governor said that he would sign, all of a sudden backpedaled and said, we're going to shove it over to this study group. We're going to study it longer. Because he was hit with opposition once again from big business and big cannabis. Because it was geared towards the worker, not towards them, thinking it's going to cut into their big profits. If you ever get an opportunity to go down and be a part of lobbying or demonstrating at the Capitol, please do so. It's an eye-opener. It really is. I mean, the lady that was actually supposed to introduce our amendment refused to. And as we met with her after and asked her why she wouldn't, it finally come out that big cannabis wasn't okay with it. And as I started to talk about what workers go through in the cannabis industry and some of this that Belinda talked about today, and just some of the safety issues and stuff. I know all about that. My parents are owners in New Mexico, cannabis owners. So she told me where she really stood. It was for cannabis and not for the workers, the slate that she ran on.
Got one more minute.
Yep. So I'm just going to stop there, and if you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask. It's kind of me going on my little soapbox here, but it's true. It's just what, there's so much more that the cannabis industry workers deserve. It's obtainable, as we have those particular things spelled out in our contracts.